We're good to go on streaming? Hello out there. If anyone's watching, it's the Grand County Change in Form of Government Study Committee meeting, regular meeting. It is Friday, November 8th, 2019, and the time is 12:02. First, we will review the minutes from our last meeting, the November 1st meeting. If anybody has any edits and or comments to the minutes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Gruber.
They were very confusing and hard to read. I think partially because we abandoned motions and votes and instead went by consensus. So I would just appreciate if we go back to motions and votes.
Sure.
Just so you can track it better.
Okay.
I know we're very agreeable here, but there is a legal record required.
Perfectly fine. Any other questions or comments on the minutes? Do we have any motions? Okay, we've got a motion by Judy Carmichael to approve the minutes as is, with the second from Bob Greenberg.
No.
Nope, second from Cricket Green. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to a vote to approve the minutes. All in favor of approving the minutes as is for the November 1st, 2019 minutes, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay. Passes unanimously 7-0. Next, we'll move to general reports. Seeing none, we'll move to community outreach and possible actions. Seeing none, we'll move to citizens to be heard. Seeing none, we'll move to presentations, or none. General business action items and discussion and consideration of. Do we have a motion to maybe shift the order around?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to shift the order to have it to where we can have County Clerk Baird go first.
Okay. To talk about the optional, item C, reviewing and amending the section of the submitted optional plan titled Section 3.03 Compensation, referring to the compensation of the county manager. Do we have a second on that? Do you have a second on moving the?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Greenberg, any discussion? Cricket?
Well, so I have to ask. I heard that you're going to apply for Ruth's job. And so then he shouldn't be in on how much we pay him.
May or may
Why
not.
not?
It may or may not be true.
That's no, okay, hang on. What the position that Ruth currently has is not the position that is currently opened
I know
until the optional plan exists.
I know.
So,
I'm just throwing it out there as
Hey,
for
there's
discussion.
There's a rumor I was going to run for mayor, too.
Oh, well, I hope.
oh,
you
hang
do.
on. Okay, let's keep topic. So we've got a motion before us to shift the order. Any discussion on moving the order around? Yes, no, no discussion. Okay, how about a vote? We're going to shift item C before item B. All in favor of shifting the order, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Okay, passes 7-0. Moving now to item C, reviewing and amending the section of the submitted optional plan titled Section 3.03 Compensation, referring to the compensation of the county manager. So, as you guys recall last time, we kind of put a blanket statement that we would leave it up to the county essentially to handle this issue. We heard discussions and kind of input from the county clerk auditor, Chris Baird, about how it would help them to be able to hire an individual for the position if there were more parameters around it. So that's what we're talking about here. I'll turn it over to Mr. Baird so he can kind of give his input to it, even though there are rumors that he is applying for the job. Still, his position would be in the interest
I'm
of...
not applying for that job. The job doesn't even exist yet. So,
Right.
It may not exist.
we don't know. Anyway, Gavin might have more to say on this also, but I had a phone conference with a legislative committee that's working on the amendments to the change of government statute, and some of them are feeling like the budget appropriation part of it may be out of compliance or in violation with the Uniform Fiscal Procedures Act, which has a lot of requirements for passing a budget. And so the last I saw that they had actually removed even the council salary provision due to that. So I guess I just drafted up that right there, and I said I don't know if it's a good idea to also put in a salary range for the county manager if even the council component might not be compliant. And so the point that I made with Stephen was that for the purposes of transparency to the citizens, it would be nice for them to be able to say, this is how much this form of government's going to cost, you know, or that they'll know, even just if it's a recommendation from the study committee. And so I just recommended putting something in the recommendations report as opposed to the optional plan. And I just wanted to say that with the council administrator's position, last year we used market data from city managers and a handful of county managers.
There's only two.
Yeah, two. And so, but I would just say that the city manager job is pretty similar to a county manager job. And so I think that the market data we use to establish the salary for Ruth's position just naturally would be applicable to a county manager. And so if you recommended to just keep the salary range the same as it already is, it would be a budget neutral transition, at least for that position, as a recommendation. Of course, you can recommend whatever you want, but that's, you know, if you wanted to be transparent about what the cost could be, then that's what I'd recommend. But you can, you know, recommend whatever salary range you want. I think, though, that it would be good for the purposes of transparency to give the citizens some idea of what the cost of this form of government is going to be or could be. But I would be squeamish about putting it in the optional plan itself, like I said, just because of the potential conflict with the Uniform Fiscal Procedures Act.
Mr. Anderson, would you like to speak to those comments?
I don't think you can
Mr.
hear-
Anderson, would you like to speak to those comments?
Yeah, I could, just a couple of idle thoughts. Number one of the directions that the new legislation may go is to take away the ability of the study committee to make any recommendations about any compensation. Of course, nobody knows what that'll show up in the final bill. The second issue is, we did mention, you'll recall, in our letter and outline to the legislature and then to the county officials, that we had picked up on that inconsistency with the County Fiscal Procedures Act and mentioned that. And so at least the legislative group is aware that there is that inconsistency. I think it's a fairly significant inconsistency. At least to the extent that the existing statute, 1924, says the study committee comes up with appropriations. We've discussed several times that's completely outside, I think, a normal expectation of the study committee. Whether the study committee comes up with compensation, I think we can be flexible about that. And by flexible, I mean either mention it or not mention it. I'm concerned that if we don't mention anything about compensation, then there ought to be a way for that compensation decision to be made. If it's made by the existing government, which is a little bit leery, then that at least can happen before the new government comes in. Otherwise, the new county legislative body would be responsible for that. It's a kind of a mixed bag, and I think it's really a situation where I think the study committee can think about public policy, make a decision based on what each folks think is a good idea. I don't know how many of you got an email from Chris, I guess on Friday. Anyway, had some good ideas about what we do with compensation, and I just think this is an area where the committee's got some flexibility, and we might want to exercise our discretion.
Mr. Greenberg?
Having retired as the executive director of a fairly substantial nonprofit organization,
I could barely hear.
Can barely hear you.
We'll pass Marcy and Mr. Anderson around.
this is Bob. Having retired from the position of executive director of a fairly substantial nonprofit, I kind of stuck my nose into the recruitment process pretty solidly, and my experience and belief is that it's rarely possible to find a successor for CEO for as little as his or her predecessor earned. I think our decision to leave that to the county, to HR and the council was the right one. I don't think we want to tie their hands, particularly in light of the legislature's apparent thinking, although it's dangerous to predict what they're going to do, that we shouldn't say anything about salaries. However, we are required, I believe, to state the initial compensation, if any, of county council members and procedures for prescribing and changing compensation. So that we have to deal with the current law, not what they're going to do. And Chris, I understand you're the budget officer and that your allegiance is to a tight and transparent budget. Right now, we've got a $50,000 range, so that the actual fiscal impact is impossible to determine, because it might be 88,000, it might be 130,000, even in the current range. So the notion that you could not negatively impact the county's budget, I understand why you would like that to be in there. I think it'd be a mistake on our part. I think we'd be tying the hands of people in the future in a way that's not particularly productive.
Well, just
So
a
my
point.
druthers would be to leave alone what we did in regard to the administrator's salary.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that my
County
recommend.
manager.
Find that a little bit, Bob, I do believe the requirement in the statute for stating initial compensation only applies to the county council.
That's right, that's right.
I'll make sure I read the
Yeah.
same thing.
That's 1752A 404 4G.
Mr. Bear?
I just wanted to point out that I didn't, my recommendation was to put it in the recommendations report, not the optional plan. There's oftentimes with ballot initiatives a requirement in statute that the clerk or auditor, I can't remember which,
Your
provides,
fault.
I know, it doesn't matter in my case, but provides a report on the fiscal impact of a ballot initiative. I don't see that particular requirement this time, but that doesn't mean that that somebody shouldn't provide it, you know. And so even though there's no requirement that anybody should have to follow your recommendation, in your recommendations report that's outside the context of the optional plan itself, I was just making the point that for transparency, it might be a good idea to give some kind of fiscal analysis of the change. But I don't see any requirement to do so.
Would you do that?
Well, I could, yeah. I mean, if you wanted me to,
You'd
I
be the
think that
person who
it would
would
be
if this gets
it would be reasonably simple. I guess I do have another question that maybe Gavin can help with, and when I review a lot of the here, maybe I'll let him get a little closer. So, Gavin, maybe you can help me with this question. When I review a lot of the noticing requirements that the council administrator's office is performing right now for the county council, most of them are the duty or the responsibility of the legislative body and not the executive. And so I guess what I'm saying is it possible for if this were to pass, is it possible for the council to pass an ordinance that delegates that responsibility to the executive? Because if not, then the council would have to have their own secretary also.
Very much, you're the clerk as well as auditor, but the clerk has a statutory responsibility to maintain minutes for the county legislative body.
Yeah, we do, but it's actually the legislative body's job to post them. But I'm talking about noticing, like noticing public hearings, noticing any kind of legislative action is in the state code, it calls out that it's the responsibility of the legislative body.
Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can you have
That's a good question. You almost have to look at each statute, setting out a notice requirement individually.
Yeah.
That is typical that you would have, even in fairly small counties, you'd have a county commission administrator that would be responsible for that kind of stuff. It'd be hard to generalize on that one. I think certainly if there are agreement between the county legislative body and a county manager, that you could work that out.
So then you're saying by mutual agreement, just in the same way, for instance, that I do, perform some of the executive duties that, would be under the council right now, like, for instance, payroll, et cetera. These are not statutory duties of the clerk auditor, but by agreement, we perform them. And so I guess it would be similar. But I'm just looking at it from the perspective of if I were to do a fiscal analysis, is there a requirement that there be a council secretary separate from the county manager?
No, there's no statutory requirement for that. It would be interesting to see how many counties have such a position. I'd estimate at least half. I don't know if you could give us an idea of something like that. And that person often, especially in the commission form of government, often tends to be the focus point for communications, both from citizens and from UAC and intergovernmental kinds of things too.
Well, I understand it in a commission form because they hold both sides of the responsibility. But when you separate the legislative and executive responsibility, then the question arises whether or not those legislative kind of busy work can be delegated to the executive.
Mr. Greenberg?
I'd be hesitant to say, give a big go-ahead because there are places both in the state code and in the proposed optional plan that says if we're confused about whether a particular role is executive or legislative, we'll look to state and federal models for separation of powers. And that kind of thing that notices really does tend to be a legislative branch sort of activity.
Mr. Greenberg?
I'm trying to remember our discussion of this matter, which was before you started attending our meetings, Chris. I know when we talked about a commission form, we assumed that the commission would have to hire help. And it's hard to imagine that a council form could get by without some kind of help, just because of the paperwork involved.
Yeah, and you have to be careful about the job description. But I'd be surprised if any commission in any size county would not have at least a secretary. There would be a secretary, would probably be a lot closer to what we might call administrative assistant, depending on the job description. So it handles a lot of those kinds of administrative and those kinds of requirements on behalf of the legislative body.
Mr. Baird?
So, I guess maybe if I did an analysis, I could assume that an agreement could be formed between the executive and the legislative branch, specifically for noticing and whatnot. I think it's possible, and so I don't know that it necessarily would require the addition of a new position or the reassignment of an existing position. It brings up another issue that I wrote about in my email that I think is on the dais, and that's that the transition plan doesn't really address what happens with the council's office, and if there's a position that's going to be eliminated, I think that really should be called out in the transition plan so that it's clear and nobody's just assuming anything, or because when the shift happens and we're just assuming that a position's going to go away, who's actually going to authorize the elimination of that position? And so I think it should be the optional plan itself that specifies that the council administrator's position is going to be dissolved or terminated, And if it's your will to reassign the staff that's subordinate to that position to the county manager or the council or whatever, then I think it should be spelled out so that, staff knows what's happening and everybody is on the same page with how things are going to progress.
Yeah. I think that's a very good idea. I've looked at all the optional plans and interestingly enough, none of them make that kind of a call out. I agree with Chris, I think it'd be a very good idea to avoid that argument. There'd have to be a recognition that if it turns out a few weeks or a few months later that, hey, we really do need this kind of position, then that's going to be within the inherent power of the new officials in the form of government.
We've got Cricket and then Judy.
Well, I just thought that when we set up the powers of the manager, that they got to pick their own staff. So then aren't we going to have a conflict if we say your job's going to stay and then the manager wants to pick their own staff? So that's just why I'm just throwing that out there because I kind of remember that.
I think we had one person was appointed directly underneath, and then we didn't really.
So, and I'm looking at this maybe more of in the way of I would in the private sector when I take over a new hotel or when I take over a new business or anything like that. I have people in place, I have support staff, and if I need to transition people out, then that's my call once I'm in. But I do think having in our transition documents a plan that does say, and it could be I think it'd be really simple. I think you could say that on this date, when the new form of government takes place, on da-da-da-da-da, all positions of here will be transitioned to this based on, and we don't have any guarantee your job's going to be there, but we don't have any guarantee it's not going to be there. We take a real,
First instance.
yeah,
it will be.
in the first instance it will be, and then that's up to whoever is hired for that position. And and that they should have that opportunity and that ability to hire and fire their own staff, obviously. But at the same time, I understand where Chris is coming from. We have people here that when that transition does happen, I don't want anybody to be like walking around like, do I have a job? That's the last thing we want. So I think if we can clarify that, that's something that's pretty simple.
I've listed that topic under future consideration. We can put it on a future topic. Judy?
In the event that this fails, who's going to decide the salaries for the commissioners? Who's going to decide how this transitions? And what is the minestrone soup that they're going to have to deal with? Does the law have this already drawn out that says these three guys are now going to miraculously solve all this that we've spent days on?
Bob?
Yeah, I think that's outside of our authority. Our authority is to recommend a plan, not to tell people
The
what
backup
happens
plan?
if they don't adopt our plan.
If we don't have any money in this, the public is not going to, just like Chris said, for transparency, the public has to know what the ultimate costs are going to be involved in this, or they're going to say, well, hell, let's go with what we've done all over the state of Utah and go back to where we were. And that isn't what the public wants us to do.
And I can note the issue of backup plan under future considerations, and we can continue talking about compensation to focus on that point, but I'll list that as another thing we can talk about a backup plan if this plan fails.
Yeah.
And talk with Mr.
I agree, it's
Anderson.
crazy, but I don't think it's our job.
Mr. Anderson, is there, when we
Let's-
talk about the preferred form of government, out of curiosity, is there, when they say, here's the preferred form of government, is there a written out, based on what your county class is, this is what this is what you get? I don't know if is that spelled out
Yeah,
anywhere?
three-person county commission.
Yeah, three-person county commission, but all the nuances that come with that, all the crossing of the T's, dotting of the I's, everything that we've done, is that spelled out in that alternative preferred plan?
And instead of discussing that right now, we can list it under future consideration, and we can come back to it.
Do that while I'm away, would you
Huh?
please?
Yeah, because let's focus on compensation instead of going off topic on that. But I understand people's desire to talk about that. We'll put that under future consideration. If we have interest, we can bring it up in a later date and go through it in full detail. Mr. Greenberg?
Well, just procedurally, I was going to make a motion that we not do anything, but I don't think that's in order. I think either we vote on a motion to do something,
Correct.
or we just
Let
let
it
it
die.
pass, right? Okay.
Right. So anyone else have other thoughts about either referring to the compensation of the county manager in the recommendation plan or in the optional plan? Other thoughts on that issue? Well,
Are we talking about just the county manager, or are we talking
just the
about
county
the
manager.
council?
Just the manager. We're on item C.
Okay.
Ruth?
Just thought it was interesting. Wasatch County is one of the counties that has a county manager. I pulled up their optional plan. They make no mention, this is years ago, they made no mention of compensation in either the council legislative body or the county manager.
One of the other, the Wasatcher Summit actually says the new county council gets $1 a year. I don't imagine that stays in place, but I think that's something nice. One of the things I think we all recognize is that there's going to be plenty of voters that are going to vote yes or no based on how much they think the new plan's going to cost. And if it looks like we're hiding the ball in terms of how much a manager or council members are going to be paid, there's going to be some pushback, I think, from the public on that.
Well,
What is the range that you came up with in that review? Is
88 to
email.
130.
88 to 130?
Yeah, and again, that was based, I guess that data is a couple years old now, but it was based on, like I say, positions that are very similar to county manager, and that's why I think it's applicable, because the research that we did is applicable to a county manager job.
If I could continue, that does seem to make sense to me to be in the recommendations, as Chris maybe suggested, if we're not sure about the authority on that, and it sounds like maybe we are sure and we don't have the authority to set the package for that, but recommending a range and cite that study so that it's not just something that sounds like we just pulled out of the air, that might be valuable.
got Bob and then Jeremy.
Well, a 2-year-old, if the study's 2 years old now, it's going to be 5 years old when we actually hire someone. I don't think half a decade's an appropriate salary range to use. So what I would suggest, and I will make a motion, that we include in the recommendations a requirement that the salary be set based on a current salary survey of similar positions in Utah.
That makes sense.
So we've got a motion to
Yep.
include a recommendation that a salary is set by a current,
Based on
based on
current survey
a current survey.
of compensation for similar positions in Utah.
I would like to add to that, if I could, Bob.
Do we have a
With-
second on it?
Let's hear what we'll say.
Well, my ad would be with like communities.
Yeah.
Within like, I would just add to that, like,
Fine,
within like, because, we look at Salt Lake
Sure.
County, we're nowhere near that.
That makes sense.
Right.
Yep.
Within like
I'd
communities.
second that.
Okay, seconded by Walt Dabney. Comments,
and
questions?
actually, we're really asking Gavin to draw something up for us.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I just want to, I don't know what. So, I mean, comparable communities that have resort economies are actually considerably higher
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah.
And so we ended up not going to that degree. We did go with an average, however. And so that, just to make it clear where this range came from, it's an average. If we averaged resort communities, then it would be much higher.
Again, you're
for-
talking about a range, though.
Yeah, and so it's a range that's based on, so the range is established based on, I think, about a 50% spread. And so the range itself is established based on just a percentage that we said we're going to have a spread of, so if we have 15 steps and they're each 3% apart, that's the range. and we established the starting salary, and then the range was established using the formula thereafter.
50% over the.
And so that's how it worked. And so it was really an average of the starting range of all these different positions, and then we established our range based on our step and grade chart, topping out at step 15. But it was based on an average and not necessarily specifically.
Well, yeah, we don't
Yeah.
have a lot of communities that are like us.
Yeah, at the time, I mean, it's interesting. At the time, the highest paid city manager in the state was in Moab.
Not surprised at all.
Between county managers, everybody.
About using the term salary survey, that's kind of a term of art that may imply a much more detailed, and maybe potentially expensive, exercise than just doing averages.
I would, yeah, and just a thought. When I say comparison, I do also, part of it means resort comparison, obviously, but also means population-wise. There's, I think, a myriad of things that you could look at with that comparison. Just a comparison analysis of.
There's a lot of considerations besides population and
Right.
resort economy. There'd be assessed value, the general economy of the county or the city. So there's going to be a lot of variations that need to be taken into account.
And I think it's good advice, Gavin, not to use a term of art, but to merely say a comparison of, as opposed to a salary survey per se.
Not.
And not necessarily the word resort community,
No.
Similar.
At all.
Similar.
Comparable or similar.
because,
Or a substitute motion?
This would be
Just altering the
before.
language?
Yeah, we just altered the language, and now it's a motion on.
Seconded.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a substitute motion.
Hold on.
Okay.
What was the substitute motion? Who's
The,
doing it?
the substitute motion is to change the language from,
Mr.
well,
Chairman,
well,
point of order.
Yes.
Until you actually state the motion, it's still ours, I believe. At least
we had
Robert's
we
would
had a
say.
second, it was
Yeah.
seconded. And at that point, it becomes the
When did,
bodies.
who seconded?
Walt.
Walt, you did second. Okay.
So, do we want to do a substitute motion then? Technically, it's the bodies, so we'd have a substitute motion on it.
That'd be fine with me.
Okay. They're changing the language away from the
so,
salary
Salary
survey to just a comparison. So that's the only word that's changing in the motion. It's
And
the
this
same
is-
motion to require that a salary is set based on a current comparison. Well,
And do we still have like communities in there?
within like communities. Do we want to
Okay,
define the
Just so like community.
In Utah.
like
in-
communities
Yeah,
in
but
Utah?
just, Morgan and us are about the same size. We aren't even close to
Do we
the
want to
same
define what
complexity.
like community is to, no. Okay. Mr. Anderson, did you hear that so far?
I think so. I'm going to rely on Ruth to get all the fine points. I'm hearing part of it, not other parts.
And keep in mind that anything we recommend right now, the legislative body of the new government can change. I mean, they can. They have that capability and that. So this is basically like, here's your starting platform, and then if you guys feel, if the community through their elected representatives feel like that needs to change, then that's on them. They either do good or, lose an election. So,
Well,
It just would seem like if we were going to say that, that we would say a salary survey or whatever we said, or not salary survey, comparative survey of counties with like complexity or something like that, because I'm just scared to death they'll use.
I think we'd want to include some terms to recognize
Yes,
that whoever makes this comparison can take into consideration a number of factors, including population size, rural-urban split, nature of the economy, assessed value. There's a ton of variables that I think would require at least some thought and consideration.
population.
Can we depend on Mr. Anderson to draft something that addresses the complexities?
I'd be happy to take a whack at something and get it down to you maybe this afternoon. I'd like Ruth to take a look at it and make sure it's in line with your motion.
I really like the main four that you said. assessed value, population, industry. I think that
Rural and urban.
rural, and I think that's, well, I mean, that's not gonna push us up to compare with Salt Lake, but it's
Or
also.
even Park City.
Or Park City, but it's also not gonna put us with what you're worried about, Morgan, so, yeah.
Somebody made a good point, though. A resort community is going to be quite a bit different than
I
a
don't know
rural farm community.
We get it.
Yeah, we do.
Well, and they're trying really hard not to make us a resort community anymore. We gotta keep that in mind.
Who they?
Let me remind you what the
Not
language currently
advertising.
says, and maybe we can think about that in terms of the motion, too. This is section 3.03. The compensation package, including salary and any benefits, shall be established by the council and may be set out in an employment contract.
Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yep.
So included in that, the existing language shall be established by the council using a then current comparison of a community of similar economy size, something like that.
Yeah.
Complexity, whatever.
And Cricket really likes assessed valuation, being
Yeah,
in the
I
biz.
think assessed value is important. It's hard to put in a phrase, but the distribution between the city, those who dwell in the municipality and those who dwell outside the municipality, changes the complexion of how a county operates, too.
So are we talking about the optional plan or the recommendations?
Recommendation.
So Gavin, they were just talking about amending the recommendations report, not the optional plan itself.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to leave the optional plan as is?
Yes, I think that's, unless anybody states otherwise.
Well, why not put this in the optional plan? You're not stating a salary.
That's
Oh,
true.
just-
Well, I would probably
Maybe just-
not tie the council's hands to always having to
Renew it.
do exactly as you say. You've only spent 5 minutes thinking about it, and it's going to last, forever.
No, it's only the first instance, Chris. It's only the first instance.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just saying, I would.
But I agree, I think we should put it in the recommendations, that way we don't risk stubbing our toe again.
Bear in mind, we've kind of got three documents going. So the transition plan and the optional plan are merged together in one document. So you've got those two potential documents. You also got the report and recommendation. So we probably do need to make a good solid decision on where you want to put it.
Cricket?
If we don't state an amount, does it get it kicked back by the county attorney? Wasn't that part of it? Wasn't that part of it that she wanted an amount?
No.
Am I not remembering right? Okay. Okay.
I think we get into the weeds when we start throwing amounts on governing documents.
Well, that's what I think
I mean,
so,
this is
too.
a governing document difference, but I do feel like it should be somewhere in the transition plan, because that's part of the transition, will be transitioning from this form of government to whatever is coming down the pipe, whether it's what we put before the people or the default, but there needs to be some type of transition, don't you think, in that hiring process of that?
Bob?
Can I
Walt?
suggest we vote on this motion and then add language in another motion as to where to put it?
Walt, comment?
I was just going to ask, are we talking about this going in the recommendations or the
The
transition?
motion didn't
Right.
say.
That
The
was
motion.
my hypothetical, like, yeah, the motion doesn't say, but I mean, I think we were talking about recommendations, and then I kind of brought us back into the mud and then the weeds again, talking about, well, it's, this is a one-case incident where we need to be able to have that in the transition too, because the old form of government needs to transition to the new form as smoothly as possibly, and hiring that position is going to be a huge part of that if this passes.
So just real quickly, so we could vote on the motion and
Put it in
then
the
we could do
recommendations.
another one as to whether it goes in study or transition. That sounds good.
Marcy, any thoughts?
I'm here. I'm having a little trouble following your chain of thought, but I'm trying.
You're fine. So right now, kind of the update, and I just wanted to get your input as well. Right now, what we've discussed is having, for the manager salary only, to be doing a comparison when we look for our initial person, and we're looking at whether we put that information in the recommendation. Right now, that's everyone's gut, is that it would go in the recommendation. Or some can think about putting it into the optional and transitional plan. We've talked about the range.
I think Chris's point is well taken in that I think this is a complex issue that I'm not sure we are seeing all of the implications or consequences, and so not putting it in the optional plan but in the recommendations makes more sense to me.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure you could be a part of the discussion. I know how it is on being on the phone.
Thank you.
Of course.
I'm listening.
Ruth?
Well, I just want to point out that the recommendation and report is more about, here's the background, here's our study, here's our results, our findings. And then their recommendation is like a couple of paragraphs long, and then your conclusion. I mean, it's going to be a little bit different flavor than how it stands right now, so just wanted you to be aware of that.
Yeah, this is this is what the current report recommendation says. Got a paragraph about the meetings we held in July and August to consider recommendation. Talks about council manager forum, 5-member part-time council, 3 at large, 2 by district. Draft optional plan has been prepared and approved and attached based on committee information received from Christina Sloan. We understand the election to be held on such and such a day, which has long passed, by the way. So that would be the logical place to put something if we put it in the report and recommendation. So again, to Ruth's point, it is a little bit different than what we currently have. That doesn't necessarily make it good or bad.
Any other thoughts on that? Do we want to vote on the motion before us?
Yep.
So we've got that we want to add language, and that language is to include a requirement that a salary is set based on a current comparison of like communities with additional information about Gavin Anderson, kind of laying out what exactly those like communities have. We don't have where that's being placed, but we would adopt that language. So,
For similar positions, and is it only Utah? You're not going to look at Colorado?
no, we're looking at Utah, like similar communities.
Yes, Utah?
Yes, Utah.
Utah,
Just Utah.
just Utah.
Okay.
Do we want to vote on that now? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Passes
Aye.
unanimously 7-0.
Okay, and is it fair to say that that was Bob's substitute motion and Walt's agreement to that substitute motion?
Sure.
We never said who was substituting it.
That
Sure.
Or
sounds
Jeremy's
perfect.
amendment or whatever.
Chris?
The council passed, I can't remember was it a resolution so every 5 years to do a market-based salary analysis and reassessment. And so that's already on the books policy-wise, and so I assume unless that changes, it's going to happen. But I will say that it's a regional analysis, not just Utah. So, and the market data that we get is from a consultant, and so it's not terribly difficult to get because he's always, and so updating that's not a big deal. But we're already forecasting that we're going to do that. And so just wanted to let you know that that's an established policy of the council that, I voted against it, but everybody else voted for it.
And it doesn't happen every 5 years, even though it's supposed to.
It's like those voter districts.
Anyway, I have to go, but if you want me to end up wanting me to do a fiscal analysis for anything, just let me know.
Well, you get time.
Oh, yeah, tons of time. I've got the all night long that I'm not doing anything.
Who needs to sleep? Especially
Thank
in the
you.
fall.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Thought you were making cheese.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments on this section, item C? Walt?
Are we going to now talk about where it goes?
Sure. Yeah.
I-
Talk.
If well, I was just following up with what Jeremy was saying a while ago. As opposed to the recommendations, if we're talking about a one-time launch of this thing, the initial thing only, I lean where Jeremy is. I think we ought to be clear that they do this survey, and then initially they do that salary based on that survey. Then they can do whatever the hell they want after that. That, to me, is cleaner than some nebulous recommendation that does not have the binding strength that the transition plan does.
And ignore the word survey.
I'm sorry, what is the term? Ruth's had
Comparison.
comparison.
Don't you love just semantics?
Well, I kept getting the manager and the thing wrong forever. I guess it's ancient age or something like that.
It doesn't give us numbers to sell it. It doesn't give us numbers to sell it. It gives us, the people have to assume that the comparison's not going to be done by a band of gypsies in a closet. You know, the people need to have a dollar amount as to what this is going to cost if they're going to vote for it or against it.
Well, I think it's going to help that we're saying compared to,
Right.
and we don't have that word resort. It's going to scare a lot of people. So that there can, you know, compare us to other communities that are in the same situation, but not do the word resort, because that shoots us up into the atmosphere.
Bob?
If I were going to do this analysis financially, what I would do is I'd take the current starting, and I'd increment it by the CPI for the number of years. And that's the best I think you could probably do. But if I were doing it, I'm sure if Chris is going to do it, he'd do something similar. I don't know what else you can do unless you nail their feet down now, which we've decided not to. But I think that'd get us awful close. Remember, the range is 50%. So why don't you make a motion?
So I would make a motion that I recommend that the initial salary of the county manager would be based on a comparison,
No, we've already done that.
We've done
This is the where.
Where do we
and
put it?
and that would go in the transition plan as opposed to the study plan,
The recommendations,
as opposed to the recommendations.
right?
Yes.
So we've got a motion that the previous language would be placed inside the optional/transitional plan instead of being placed in the recommendation, is the motion.
I
Correct.
second that.
Seconded by Jeremy Day. Discussion. Jeremy.
It leads credence. I agree that it says, okay, here's how this has to happen. Here's what you got to do. It gives us a solid number to start out with, to sell it, like you're saying, to say, hey, this is what it's going to cost initially. This is what it's going to be done. I think Chris could then look at it and say, okay, here's an average, and he can put that in his document to be able to sell the plan, to be able to say to the community, this is what it's going to cost. The crazy thing about it is that we got so long before it's implemented that things could go, based on the economy, they could go up, they could go down. So, they're going to have to do it in the transition closer to the time in which they're going to be hiring for that manager position. So, but at the same time, Chris can then take it and say, this plan is going to cost us between this and this. This is where it's going to fall in those margins.
A range, yeah.
And as a recommendation, it's good, it's fine, but I think this one needs to be a little bit more binding for the community to say, we're not just going to go out and we're not going to go try to poach somebody we like. We're going to, that way we're not behind closed doors saying, hey, how much do you want? If you'll come over here, there's a process. This is the process in which we do this. Here it is. There you go.
Cricket?
Well, I like the idea on the economy, because then if the economy goes, we're not stuck clear up here trying to pay a big salary.
Anybody who thinks that our economy is just solid as a rock is either I
Dreaming.
want what
Dreaming.
they have because I need some of those pills, or it's wishful thinking. Because yeah.
Okay.
Typical language, the language I suggest we
Yep.
Yes.
Yep,
Yep.
yep, you got it.
Perfect.
Any other discussion about placing this inside the optional/transitional plan instead of the recommendation?
No, Jeremy changed my point of view.
Sorry.
Aw.
I don't
So-
mean to.
Seeing no other discussion, we'll have a motion on placing the previously approved language into the optional/transitional plan instead of the recommendation. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Or say aye.
Aye.
Passes 7-0. Any other conversation on item C?
Just one
Yeah.
quick point that kind of rang true with something Chris said is regional as opposed to just Utah, because we may make more sense with a little New Mexico and Colorado down here, areas of similar size that they could, I don't know, but there's not a whole lot else around us. And some of the northern part of Utah may not be as good a measure. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know this is a fact, but he mentioned a regional study might make more sense.
Cricket?
Except for that would include Durango and Telluride, so I don't know that
Vale.
that's
Park City or
Yeah. Other comments on that?
The places we don't want to become. That's what's scary. Washington,
Yeah,
little
Washington
bit.
County,
Washington County.
Washington County a little bit, for sure.
Laverne, and
Yeah, and I get that. That's why we throw in. I mean, the resort. The idea that it's like and like it's why I lean to saying like, yes, there's that factor which puts us up really high, but then we go down to our population size and we go, okay, well,
assessed valuation.
assessed valuation is a little different. All right, let's find an average there, and then we start working with averages and statistics, and that's where I lean to say, yeah, I understand the resort side of our reality is extremely expensive, but I also look at the other side of, say, our population, our assessed value, that type of stuff it grounds us a little bit more, and brings us back to reality.
You know, we just need to make sure the language says we consider all of these factors, not just resort.
That's
right,
right.
not pick and choose.
Any other discussion, Walt?
You want somebody to be able to come down here and live, buy a
It's
house,
true.
or they're not going to come. And we don't want to paint ourselves to be so conservative that we
No,
can't.
I
reach
agree.
out.
It's
One look at the real estate here is going to run a lot of people off.
Any other discussion?
I just don't see where anybody's thinking we're conservative.
No, I think he means
I'm just
economically.
teasing him.
Yeah. I mean, we have to make it attractable to hire. This is our reality. But at the same time, if we just went strictly off of what the resort communities do, we wouldn't be able to afford it. You know, so we have to ground it a little bit in our reality. So
Okay. No further discussion on item C. We'll move to item B, reviewing and amending the section of the submitted optional plan titled 2.06 Compensation of the Council. Inside your packet, we have items B, and all throughout B and C, there's a matrix that kind of breaks down. It's a neat matrix, I think, Ruth, for this, that breaks down what the role of the county manager is versus what the role of the county council is.
Stolen from Tuella County.
Yeah, stolen from Twilla County, but she did that, so we give her credit for that. There's also information about optional plan, executive duties, and lastly, no, just those pieces of information. The reason why we brought this back up, we had discussions between members about looking at compensation again. This is the opportunity that individuals will have to look at compensation, and that's kind of where I wanted to start the discussion. Anybody can kind of jump in. Our previous numbers, Mr. Anderson, can you remind us on what we previously agreed?
24 and 27.
24 and 27. 24 would be for the individual members, and 27 would be for the chair.
Yeah, and no county benefits of those required. Same for the other costs of living adjustments of county employees generally. Receive compensation for expenses such as travel. Salaries may be modified by a vote of 3 of the council, but the lowest salary increase will not become effective then
it seems to me Chris is the one who thought we ought to look at some other numbers, but he's not here to help us with that. Has he discussed?
He wasn't planning to, I don't think, on county council. His interest was county manager in terms of wanting to,
Okay.
that's my understanding.
I personally think the numbers are okay. But
Well, I can. No, I don't have his.
I do, but it doesn't say.
he
I
doesn't,
do,
he
yes.
doesn't address that.
Administrator.
He doesn't address that. Yeah,
No.
he's addressing the manager, which is understandable. Hey, if any, we just put a big goose egg there. You don't get
The
compensated.
dollar.
This is just,
The dollar.
there you go. Hey, we don't get paid.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes. Will you use your mic?
Yeah, can do it. I've had input from people as to what the difference was between what the salary was and and when they went to the 31, what the difference variation was in those two salaries. And that a certain amount of the people that I deal with are people like us, me, of course, old, and they don't think it's a way, they don't think it should be a way to make a living. They think it's a way to do your public service. And their feeling was that 24 was too much. So, and I'm passing that along. I don't think I have bad habits, so 24 wouldn't be a living wage for me. But the racehorse would have to go.
That's right.
So do you have a suggestion, Judy?
I'd like to know what we were and when it went to the 31, why they're concerned. Did we go from 15 to 31?
It was around 12 something.
From 12? Okay, that's where that's
It
coming
had
from.
not been raised since 1992.
That's where
Other than COLA, which they did COLA, they did all those years of COLA all in 1 year, a couple of years ago.
Well, it's a lot less job. This is going to be legislative. It's going to be less of a job. The money needs to be put into administration, and into administrative staff, and not into people who are trying to do their public service. That, when I came on, I was doing it for public service. Everybody can't afford to do that, I realize that. But I've been hit with the 24 quite a few times. So, the only person who I managed to get a number out of was that if you've got 5 people, they should split the $100,000. But that isn't necessarily something that, So, is 24 too much?
Bob?
Well, as Ruth points out, actually, if you go back to 92, when we were paying 700,
Yeah.
is that right?
Sounds right, yeah.
Yeah.
If you just increment that based on inflation, it's awful close to 24.
Is it?
Actually, it's more than 24. And I can get the exact number if you want.
Mr. Chair, I've got a couple thoughts. Or were you about to say something,
No,
Jeremy?
go ahead.
Just that when you all were doing the open houses, you had some data in front of you, which I could grab, that shows what the 2 counties that do have this form are doing, what their council members are being paid, Summit and Wasatch, and that might be helpful. It seemed like one was only about 12,000 each, and maybe the other was, it might have been 31 or something, I don't know. It was a pretty decent range. I could look at that for you if you like.
Well, 12,000's $1,000 a month. That's a pretty good second job.
I'm going to share one of my employees who she's lived in this community, been here a long time. She's in a strong position for me. She's a right hand. I just asked her, out of curiosity, what she thought between this and this, and for a part-time job, if that's a lot of money. When I said 24 to 30,000, 25 to 30,000, is that a lot of money for a part-time job? And she goes, she's a great lady. She goes, I leave you for that type of money for a part-time job. So, I mean, the reality of it is, when we look at the overall population of Moab and we say you're going to have a part-time job for $24,000 to $27,000, that's good money for these folks. You know, this is our reality. And the question we have to ask ourselves is are we trying to create a job here, or are we trying to create, you know, a public service? This is the vying difference of opinion in a lot of ways. Is that compensation, where your compensation should be for what traditionally throughout our history in this nation has been volunteerism within civic responsibility. So how much are we compensating you for your civic responsibility? That's how I'm viewing it in my head. I look at that 20, 24, 27 for the chair. The chair does do a lot, but then the question gets asked. Okay, so let's just say we have $100,000, round that up or whatever, a little bit more, $115,000 to spend. That's what the council is. Then they hire a secretary position to help them out. Well, you're going to hire a full-time staff who's going to do that. You're going to pay them what, $50,000, you know, $40,000 to $50,000 for full-time staff to be able to do secretarial work. Well, we've already just jumped that up to like between $150,000 to $180,000. That's just going for the legislative body, you know, where they don't have nearly the amount of work that they have right now. Now, it's interesting of how that work has been gobbled up by other elected representatives, or by Ruth's office, or by Chris Baird's office, or this and that. It has been gobbled up from this council. So it's obvious that the work in our current form of government has kind of been delegated already, in some aspects. So for me, I would like to see it more of like, this is what your job is. This is as the legislative, like we have here. Here's your responsibilities. This is why you're being paid this. And here's the comparison to the responsibilities they used to have. And I think that would help explain, too, one of the reasons we're looking at saying you don't have nearly as much responsibility, you don't have nearly as much work as you did, so here are we at. But at the same time, we want good people to run, and it is a lot of work.
So I've got Bob, then Walt.
Can I say something, too?
Sure, Marcy, you get to go. Okay, after Walt. Perfect.
I just did looked up some inflation calculators and did some quick numbers. And if you just took $700 in 1992 and asked what that would be, what it would take to have the same buying power today, the answer is $1,281, or a total of $15,372 a year. So that's just holding it even with the part-time salary that we paid people thinking they were county council members in 1992. So I think, you know, if we figure we were smarter back then, we probably ought to go with that number. If we think we're smarter now, then I guess the door's wide open. But so we're looking, I believe, at $24,000 to $15,300, and the number's somewhere probably within those bounds. You know, and the proof is going to be in the pudding. You know, see who runs.
Walt, and then Marcy.
Yeah, my only reservation about this is I think when we talk about public service, we don't want just a cross-section of the public that can afford to do this job. And I've seen that in the Texas legislature is all rich people, because they're the only ones that can afford to do that job because they pay them almost nothing. So if what we're talking about is not that person like you have, she's not going to leave you, but she may be, and I don't know who you're talking about, she may be interested and she may have a whole lot to offer to do this, but it's damn sure got to be worth her while to be a public servant, because she's probably given up other things that she could be doing to maybe even make some money.
Yeah,
So I think we need to be really careful about being too tight with this thing, unless we just want old retired guys like me and Bob.
We're good, us old retired people.
We are, but you could afford to do that, and I could afford to do that, and you and I, neither one are going to do that. But I can see some young people in this community I'd love to attract to come do some of this thing, this kind of work. That's just good for the future as well. So that'd be my great reservation in making this too tight.
Marcy?
So based on Jeremy and Walt's comments, then we could just have a sliding scale, and the older you get, the less.
Based on your income.
We could do a means test.
Oh, Marcy. Ouch.
Yeah. So I was just saying nothing.
That's right.
So I agree with Jeremy in terms of the idea of, public service and wanting to make a difference at some level. I look at this committee and I think, why did the people on this committee say yes? It wasn't because they were gonna get paid something. Because, for me, I thought, this is a place where I can make a difference and I can contribute, positive change in my community. I also appreciate Will's comment that, we don't want just the old, tired, financially secure people are the only people that are able to run. So somewhere in the middle, is the right place, and I think that being able to outline to people exactly what the job entails and how the executor is going to take the heat off the council, I think that's how we'll be able to explain it and sell it.
Good. Thank you, Marcy.
Mr. Chair, I guess I've got a couple other thoughts if you,
Yeah.
so we have a former council member here. Or two, that's right, yeah, who probably, they know how much was involved in all the various committees, boards, districts. We have, I want to say, how many do, we have like upwards of 40, I think, commissions, boards. Anyway, that's going to have to be divided out between those 5 instead of 7, so keep that in mind. But the offset to that is we now have a budget advisory board, and in your days, you all looked at every council, every budget from every operating department. That is no longer the case, and that is not the job of the legislative branch. The legislative branch adopts the budget, but does not do all the work that goes into the budget. That's on the county manager and budget officer, which might be the same person. So there you go. Just more to think about in terms of workload of council members.
Cricket?
So, I just did some math, which, I went to Grant County High School. So, I mean, I think that, yeah, $1,600 a month seems like a good amount of money.
That's right at my
That's what I figure. I mean,
CPI adjusted,
I could see that.
$700 a month.
And times that by 12 is 19,200, which is still a lot better than what we were, which is 24, so we're still bringing it within. So, and then I would say that I'm still willing to pay the additional amount to the chairman because they're going to have more to do, so I would make a motion for that.
For the 3 additional?
So your numbers would be 19,200 and then 22,200 for the chair.
Yes.
So we've got a motion that we would adopt the salary for the council members for each year. Annual salary would be 19,200 with the
The
chair's. Initial county council members would be 19,200 and the initial chair would be 22,200. That's been the motion before us. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We've got a second from Judy Carmichael. Discussion.
Sorry, was that 20,000 and then
22,200.
22,200? Okay.
22,200 and 19,200.
Got it.
Walt?
I'd just like to ask Ruth again, you said there's 40 different entities that they have to be divided up now 5 ways.
40 to 50, I believe. I know it's
40
more
to
than a couple
50.
dozen.
again, I just am concerned with trying to get Jeremy's person that is not independently economically viable, who's going to want to sign on, it's not just coming to this meeting.
You know, Bob and I were not either one independently wealthy when we served. We were both working class people.
I understand that, but you were fully employed, you weren't working 3 jobs or that kind of thing, probably.
I got you. Good.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, and I'm not
Yeah.
trying to argue that. I just want to make sure we're not cutting out some of this population that probably has good ideas
Hang on.
and concerns that
Here's the line.
that are a different perspective than.
Sure, and
Almost 50.
and I'll speak to that. Looking at the number, if we're dividing 19,000, it's going to be 1,600. And if they're going to be doing 20 hours of work per week, then we're paying them $20 an hour. If you increase it to, let's say, 160 hours a week, if they're working full time, we're paying them $10 an hour. That's full time. So the discussions that I've had with Ruth, just in passing, kind of talking about the different meetings, the organizations that are reporting to them, they're not monthly meetings for all of them, are they?
Not all are monthly, no.
Some
There
are
almost-
some are every 2 months, and some meetings are every
Some are quarterly.
some are quarterly. So what you're looking at is how much time do they actually spend, and you've got a range of involvement. My inclination is that it's pretty close to what something that I would agree to. If you're doing 20 hours a week per each week, and some weeks you don't have council member meetings. Just my thoughts. I've got
5 into 50 is 10 different functions that somebody's got to have some relationship with.
20 hours a week though is quite
Where's
a
20 hours a week coming from?
if we're saying, is it a part-time job? Are we spending 40 hours a week? Are we spending 20 hours a week? Even if we take 1,600 divided by 4 divided by 40, that's $10 an hour. It's still more than minimum wage. Breaking it down.
Pay them $2 an hour and see if they get tips.
Yeah.
Well, and
But-
another thing too, the other thing too is they're not doing the budgeting, which poor
That's
Chris is
major.
doing.
That's major.
That's huge. They just got to read it, and then that's coming in your
Okay.
20 hours a week thing.
We've got Bob then Judy, or Bob then Jeremy.
Yeah, I think trying to figure out how many hours a week people work is thankless. I mean, we can all tell you, there are some council people who've worked, half an hour a week,
That's
and
right.
some who've worked probably 40.
Includes a meeting week.
Yeah, it was a meeting week. Sleep at the switch just a little bit. But anyway, I think the real question is, Waltz, how do you make sure that people who have to give up a little bit of their income in order to find the time to serve are still able to? And I think incrementing it for inflation from 700 is a reasonable approach. So I would rather keep it at 24, but I understand that that may be a real issue for many people, and that 1,600 seems at least a reasonable place to start. And it's a substantial reduction from what we're doing. It's like half of what we're doing now, and that ought to impress anybody. But it's enough so that it's actual money. It's not,
The goal is to be able to sell the process to the public.
well, and have a good process.
Yeah, and have.
Marcy, you want to speak?
I've just been thinking about this idea of part-time versus full-time and who's going to, how can we incentivize people to apply for the job? I do think that money, certainly money will factor into a person's decision. But I also feel like that I think we are definitely making the council position part-time. And we are moving a bulk of the responsibility to the And that is a decent wage in law. Unfortunately, it's a pathetic wage when you really talk about cost of living and what it costs to survive. And then here's the bottom line. The people who want to be involved are going to find a way to be involved. And a lot of times, those are the people that are already working, full-time, working 2 or 3 jobs, and they're going to say, hey, I have something to say, I'm going to get involved. That's the way it goes. So I don't think you can count on money being the impetus to convince someone to run for office. And, I think $1,500 a month is reasonable.
Out of curiosity, I need to answer if they're not to. Has anyone heard anything from the existing council members about this the issue of compensation?
No, nor do we think we wanted to hear from, we didn't have an inkling to involve them on this part. I thought the idea was to keep them separate, right?
No, I definitely wouldn't ask him. I just wondered if anybody heard.
The only thing that I've heard is that there's been, the comments that I've heard is that there's been frustration that we would reduce the amount, and one council member said that they thought that they had earned the 36,000. Has been the only comment that I heard through the rumor mill.
Well, I sat through a pretty acrimonious argument about that right here among councilmen. One of whom thought it was way too much, and the other was absolutely incensed because he felt as if he earned every penny of it. But, again, we got to go back to Walt's question. Judy didn't care about the money. I was only in it for the money. Motivations are different, but you have
I knew that, Bob.
I know. You can tell.
Wow.
Um,
Cricket
I would-
and Ryu.
But if Cricket and I agree on something, it must be right.
It's got to be. But I got to tell you, everybody knows we just had an election, and everybody right before that election received their increase in the county taxes. And people, maybe in the
property
city they
tax.
didn't, but the county's pretty incensed. And now they're discussing possibly adding, to help the city. And so my thing is, if we can bring that budget down, because we are going to have to hire, the staff, that we're not going to add another tax increase. I know this is way down, but that's part of my concern, is to try to keep Grand County's budget in control.
Walt? Then Jeremy.
Yeah, the only other thing, and on trying to get people to run for this, part of it, I think, can be a financial thing, because, I've heard people say, well, so-and-so, these people don't even show up at school night, after school night. Well, hell yes, that's right, because they're working their 3rd job and don't have any chance to do that. So it's pretty, it concerns me a whole lot, this cutting things off. The other thing I'll say is, okay, so it's 20 hours a week. Another common comment I hear from people, whether it's the city council people or the county council people, this isn't just sitting up here and everybody loves what you're doing and they're clapping you on the back and so forth. This can be a pretty damn uncomfortable place to be, and you got a big percentage of this county that's going to think you're a communist, and the other half is going to think you're a hero. And so there's a lot of people that have told me, you'd be crazy to run, not me personally, you'd be crazy to run for that job. It ain't worth it. And so I don't know what the financial value of that is, but I don't want to cut people out that would be trying to figure a way to do it, but I also don't want to be too cavalier and saying this is just an easy way to make some extra money. Because if you're doing your job, you're going to have people not only while you're sitting up here, but in the community that are going to be giving you hell one way or another. So we want to get people that are willing to come in here that can do it financially, because this is at least enough to make that worthwhile. And secondly, be willing to put up with some stuff. Regardless of what your position is on different issues, you're going to have some segment of this population that doesn't think that's right, and they're going to be very vocal about that to you and your family, maybe.
Cricket, then Jeremy.
Well, I get your argument, I do, but I serve on 2 committees this year that have taken
You get it all the
a
time.
a lot of my time, and they're both at my cost. I mean, I'm not getting paid a dime, and I'm putting in lots of hours here, and I'm putting in lots of hours on the planning commission. And there's, most of those committees she's talking about, they're non-compensated. If those people are willing to put in all those hours for nothing, then these people should be willing to put in, I'd be willing to put in those hours for planning commission. You pay me that much twice a month. I mean, for 2 meetings, well, it's a lot more than that, because I read all of the, and I sit, and they want me to go to all these workshops, but I'm just saying, there's a lot of people in this county who do a lot of things for no compensation at all. And I think this is a lot of money compared to what I've put in this summer.
I made my points.
Jeremy
I get you.
and Bob.
I agree with pretty much what everybody said in in one aspect or another. I'm being honest. I mean, I think of it this way: there's times where this job, being a council member, is not going to be worth any amount of money on planet Earth. You're going to literally just want to quit. I mean, and then there's times when, you know what, that wasn't too bad for the last little while. It's all going to be situational, but I think the key here is to remember that we're trying to balance that civic duty and sense of community with some compensation. And I agree. I will say that I agree. I think 19,200 is a good start. 22 is a good start. That the workload's been cut. That's a good start. And keeping in mind that in reality, I mean, this is, and I'm just being real, but and keep in mind, I think I pay at my hotel. I think I'm not top line, but I don't think I'm anywhere near the bottom. I think I'm upper middle in my average. Where my staff, this for a lot of people, this is full-time wages, just period. You know, $20 an hour. Wow. If I offered that, boy, people would come running. I could.
How many hours you can give?
You know, and how many hours? But this is reality. And there's going to be people on the council who are going to make $20 an hour, and there's going to be people on the council who might only make 10 because they're going to put in that extra work, and that's going to be up to them. But I think those people aren't going to be discouraged by what we pay. I mean, if I was discouraged right now about how much time I have spent, especially during an election season, like off of and trust me, my wife was starting to look at me like, "Are you kidding me? You're not going to be home till what time again?" But this is, and I tell her, I said, you know, this is just it. It's also why I promised her I'll never run for government until the kids are out of the house. But you know, that's the caveat there. There's going to be people. For me, it's not about financial compensation. For me, it's about timing with my family and what makes sense. And for some people, it will have some financial compensation. But anybody who looks at these numbers and says, "Oh, that's not enough compensation," I think you really need to look at our community. I think you need to look at the majority of the people who actually live and work here and what they're making, because I'm telling you right now, that's a high wage for Moab, even for a and probably what our average would be for a full-time position if you went majority of the people in our community. So it's fair compensation. Is it too much? No. Is it too little? No, I think it's you know, just about, you know, where we should be, and if it comes in hindsight and they do their cost of living analysis, I mean, the reality of it is, no matter what we set right here, even if it's in the documents, it can be changed. So to me, it's fair, it's a start, and I like that. So,
Bob?
We only have one number on the table here. I think we ought to go ahead and vote for it. Just out of curiosity, that would save the county about $137,000 a year by my calculation. Well, 31,000 times 7.
Oh, you mean from what it is now?
Yeah, from what it is now. And that's enough to put some money into admin, to fund a council secretary in addition to somewhat beefing up the executive office.
Well,
Let me finish, please.
I'll have a comment after that, yes.
In addition, the average income of a Grand County resident is currently $23,800.
yeah.
Exactly.
So the 24,000 was set right on the average, but it's not the equivalent of a full-time job, probably, except for maybe a few very compulsive people that we could all identify. So, again, I think we would just go ahead and vote on the 16.2 and have done with it here.
19.
Unless someone's got some other, I haven't.
19.2.
I'm sorry, 19.2.
You just looked that up?
Yeah, it's better.
Did you just lower that?
Well, I know that's
No,
right
no.
from
Cricket's proposal. I haven't heard any, Walt, I
Judy's
haven't
proposal.
heard a number from you that you think would be better. Are you advocating we stick with the current 24 and 27?
When we set this one, we had the same discussion.
We did.
And so now we're
Once is
having
enough.
exactly the same
Yep.
discussion. I just wanted to
Yeah.
clearly in my mind where
And I,
it's coming from.
and I think we should work really hard to keep Steve an honest man at having 1-hour meetings here.
Hey, full
He was-
disclosure, Ruth was concerned we wouldn't have an hour-long meeting. She's like looking in, she's like, I don't think we're gonna get to an hour, and I said, you underestimate us.
Ruth,
So Ruth
There's
wanted
hope.
to make a comment about Bob's comment, and then we'll get to Jeremy.
Just real quick, that the council has already put for the 2020 tentative budget, which they've adopted, and so it'll probably go forth, to beef up our office to where we have an assistant administrator, which will be hired by the new administrator, which the council is starting to get into their process of looking at applications. There were a number of applications received, but anyway, so that's going to be one grade just below the administrator. And they'll probably split out half and half, where instead of having 12 department heads, they'll each have 6, which is a lot more sanity. So anyway, that piece is already in there. Just wanted to throw that in there. But the other is, my curiosity was, we are kind of having a similar conversation as before, and what was the impetus, maybe for your benefit, what was the impetus of bringing this up again? I believe it was your agenda item.
No, it was we were looking at compensation. I asked if anybody had any questions about salary, and we wanted to look at it again.
Was it just to look at, I mean, you
well,
wanted to have this conversation again?
it was really that we got a lot of backlash that it was too high. I did. I got a lot of backlash from people who watched this. Why would you put it that high? And I'm like, I thought it was down a lot from what it was. But so then I just really thought about it, and I was thinking 15, but I was willing to go with the 6 with the math that Bob had done.
Well,
Judy?
In the tax notice.
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know, that's the
absolutely.
reason. I'm quite
Yes.
sure that's the reason that we got this, with the election and the tax notice was the reason this.
Yes.
You know, they can always go up. They're not, nobody's gonna come to this office and say, well, we're gonna cut it. So, I mean, you know, you start at a range, they can go up if it becomes absolutely obvious, you know.
They could do it the first meeting, theoretically.
They wouldn't get it till the next, but yeah.
And my piece on this, I think everyone's been here involved in some sort of election campaign or some sort. I think all of us, working in the political sector or volunteering or campaigning, there's only a certain type of person that will do it or put themselves through it, and there's certain people that wouldn't put themselves through it twice. I don't think that there's any amount of money that will encourage people, but I think that this is an amount that it should encourage people to consider it. I don't think it's an amount that isn't impossible to work into one's life to choose this over a different part-time job. So that's my 2 cents on it. Any other discussion, Jeremy?
I just want to add this because this kind of was the thought that it kind of got told to me is pick a salary that isn't a slap in the face to the working average man, woman in Grand County. Because when you throw out a higher salary, that's a slap in the face sometimes to some folks. And I asked people who worked for me, who work for other hotels, that I don't really associate with outside of work, how do you feel about this? That I don't talk to maybe politically. And that was kind of the reality. If they're going to do it, it shouldn't be too much to where that we're putting this value here. This is the value here. And I think sacrifice and service go hand in hand. And anybody who thinks that there's not going to be sacrifice related to this position needs to probably never run for government, in my opinion, because it's going to require sacrifice, and it's not about compensation. But, yeah.
Okay, any other comments? Marcy, you want the last word?
No.
Okay, you had it anyways. Haha. We will move to vote then on this issue, and we would vote to amend or to change the compensation that was listed in section 3.03 to $19,200 for the,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 2.06. That salary amount would be $19,200 for the county council members and $22,200 for the chair. 19,200, 22,200 would be the two numbers, respectively, one for the council members themselves and then 22,000 for the chair. Initial, correct. Initial. No other discussion was had. All those in favor of changing that amount, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Aye. Raise your hands. Unanimous.
Aye.
Passes 7-0.
Really?
Any other discussion on item B, as in boy? Seeing none, we'll move to consent agenda action items. There are none. Move to discussion items. There are none. Move to discussion and possible action item on study strategy. There are none. Possible hearings, or public hearings, possible action items, none. Future considerations. We've got two items that we wanted to talk about on future considerations. First is the transition plan directly speaking to terminating or dissolving or merging employment. I think this would be a fuller discussion that we should put to talk about in detail on one of our future dates. I think that this would probably take a little bit more crafting and information probably from Mr. Anderson to be able to fully flush out and to understand what individuals we are shifting around or moving, and especially information from the current council administrator would probably be extremely valuable because she will know who is her staff and how we would look
And
at
what
their
the plans
positions
are
and what
in
the
the
plans
budget
are.
for next year, yeah.
Right. So I would recommend we put this on probably not the 15th, but after the 15th, our next meeting is on the 29th?
Actually, December 13th.
I'm sorry, December 13th. I think we should probably have it on our next.
And that one is reserved currently for the optional plan edits. So
I think
that
we
would
should,
fit.
and unless we want to make another date between now and then, I think we really need to have that be a discussion item. Anybody want a 13th?
On the 15th of November,
13th of December.
we're getting close.
We have a meeting update.
Yeah, that's our next meeting date, besides the 15th.
Okay.
Unless we want to put it on the 15th.
We could put it on the
I
15th
know it's districts,
and
but
then maybe move it back.
Yeah.
Put it on there so that if we have time to do it.
My
That's
question
right.
becomes, is that enough time to get the information together that we need to make educated decisions about that part of the plan? And Ruth would probably be the best to answer that.
I need to know what all you need.
Maybe check around with a couple of other counties and just get a sense of what similar sized counties might be doing with their police staff and council staff.
Yes, I've done that. I've provided that before, so that part I have already.
Yeah,
At least
yeah.
for the two county managers, and that's easy. It's definitely a bigger office than I've got.
Well,
So
as far as
this,
number of people.
this discussion would include, for example, the position that Ruth's in that they're going to just refill. That would be in position for a year or
Staff.
two. And then would,
her
would,
staff may or may not transition over. The current administrator may or may not, depending on what the council wants to do.
Well,
become
the
the
Depending
county
on what
manager.
we put in the plan.
That's right.
Right,
That's
yeah.
why we need to look at it.
Right.
So this is the transition. This would be when we transition from our current form of government to whatever's coming down the pipe. 'Cause
Well, no, only to our
only to
proposal.
ours. The rest is on them. We'll let the state deal with that. But to our new plan, if it is voted for and approved by the citizens, it's that transition of what happens to the staff in between that time period, and I think we spell that out. And I really don't want to have a meeting on the 29th, because that's when I go do Christmas shopping on Black Friday
So,
with those deals.
yeah,
Stand in line.
I think
Okay.
we should add it to the next one if district doesn't take as long.
December,
The district one. And just in
Okay.
case we don't go
Yes.
over our hour, we could surprise Ruth.
everyone's nodding that they want it on the district day.
Yep.
But we could always move it.
Yep.
We could
Okay.
table it.
Okay, so I will hold you guys to, if we can't handle it, you guys will postpone it. So,
And Stephen loves that.
we'll put it then on our next meeting on the 15th.
So how did you word that? Transition plan to dissolve, or what was it?
To merge.
Well, just to
It's,
address the issue of current staff.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Say that again, Mr. Anderson?
Terminating or transferring council staff, is that
yeah, yeah.
I don't want to use that word terminate.
No,
No.
Ruth
How
really
about-
does.
How about just,
How about,
Okay, I got it.
how about employment and transitional plan?
Yeah.
Something vague and friendly sounding.
Yeah.
is there anybody involved other than council staff, Ruth staff?
I don't think
No.
so.
I don't,
Not thinking anyone else, right?
no. No. So
No,
that,
that's-
we have that
and
then
Ruth,
on
Well-
the 15th.
And we all kind of, we've been getting a lot of emails, so the whole thing is we could come with an idea that we're not fleshing out. So we could
Yeah,
try to,
that would be great.
if it happened, right?
Yep, and Monday's a holiday, so
Yeah.
you've got time.
Yep.
But whoever we hire now for 2 years,
May or may
It's
not.
almost 3 years.
regardless of what our recommendation
They
would
can,
be,
yeah. They can
they may be hiring them under one criteria to do a job now, that when you get to 2 years and we've said whatever we say, I mean, it may not be the person that is
Yeah.
capable of moving into this next much.
that's why we need to specify.
Well, and the new, whoever takes office, the newly elected government could choose to hire that individual or remove that individual.
Unless we put in the plan that
That's the
there'll be an
problem.
automatic transition.
Sure. But I don't know, I don't know if Ruth, would you want, if your current job, would you want the manager job?
Those are two different jobs, and,
They are.
and the state law says that the new body picks that
That's
person.
exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
The new body has to pick that person. Now,
So-
it might be
so-
the seated person, and the county council is aware of that.
I don't think
and
we
is
can
looking
say
for-
they
Well,
stay.
hold on. Let's get got a point of clarification.
Yeah.
It's not the manager we're
No,
talking
no,
about.
no.
We're talking about Ruth's support staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's who I'm talking
Not
about.
Ruth.
Like, I'm
Well,
not
I-
talking about the position of Ruth's right now or the position that will end up becoming the manager. I'm talking about the transition of the support staff.
Right.
Because that new manager that gets picked,
Administrator.
administrator, that new administrator that gets picked is going to have support staff.
But you
But
will have had this new Ruth in place for a year or two.
Maybe not.
It'll be
though.
almost
Like
3
you
years.
said,
It'll be
like
almost 3 years.
you said flat out, they could come in, and that new body could
Fire them.
fire them and not hire that person. That new body will pick
They have
that
to. Yeah.
they have to.
So this
And
is
it may be that, but what I'm more talking about is the transition of support staff in that office transition.
So they're not
because
left
there's going to be a
hanging.
vacancy. There's going to be a period where there is no manager. I mean, because this government starts on what, January 1st, 2022, right, or the 6th or whatever. Well, then they have their
23.
first meeting, the 23rd.
23.
23. So 2023. So they have their first meeting on whatever day that in that first month. Then they will hire. There's a position. There's a time period there where our transitioning documents need to be clear as to what happens within the transition period of the old form of government, the new form of government. So it's spelled out. So that staff on January 1st, they know they got to come to work on the 2nd.
Bob?
You know, so that's more what I'm talking about is that transition there.
Bob?
It seems to me if that 224 is in conflict with existing state law, if Ruth is right, because 1758 404 1 B Roman V, making of interim and temporary appointments is part of what we're supposed to do. So I just want to suggest that we ask for Mr. Anderson's opinion on whether or not we can specify what happens to the incumbent in the county council administrator's job. Does that person transfer automatically as an interim county manager? Do we have the authority to say that? Do we have no authority to address that at all? Let's just be clear about that. We don't want to create another legal problem for ourselves here. We might want to just put this in the recommendations to avoid it, since it is an iffy situation.
Note that Cricket Green is leaving. Mr. Anderson, do you have a quick response to that, or is that something you'd like to take under advisement? Perfect.
Oh, okay. So that's a moot issue then.
You can't control.
It could be 90 days too, easily.
Oh, 6 months once.
Excellent. So when we meet next time to talk about this point, I'd just like if Mr. Anderson, if you could kind of maybe start with that issue, and then we can decide whether we're talking about just support staff or both individuals. So that would,
And
that would
maybe
be
we
great.
want to put in the recommendations that the county council administrator serve as the acting county manager until such time as the council appoints.
And
Yeah.
just, I mean, I think that would be, I think that's probably one of the concerns that the county's going to have when they try to hire this individual,
Yeah.
because who's going to want to move to Moab for a employment of at most 3 years and maybe less, depending on the transition. But the only other item that I have for future
And I have one.
consideration is the backup, or if we have to delve, and this is a question for you, Mr. Anderson, if we have to delve into any transitional ideas or plans if in the event that the voter plan fails.
Life sentence.
If you could, we'll put that on the December 13th meeting so that you could maybe give us an update or an email prior to that, and we can just remove it. But I just want to get some clarification if it is supposed to be our duty. If it's not, I don't want to delve into it. But if it's something that we're supposed to handle, then, I mean, we're trying to be as onerous as we can. Any other future considerations that anybody would like to talk about, Bob?
Yes, since I won't be here for the districting discussion, and it's always a little bit of a crapshoot as to whether or not phone participation will work from Southern Africa. I did want to say a few things, because I've been thinking a lot about the discussion here, and I've done some research. Only 4 states actually allow non-elected officials to draw districts. It's very much the exception. I've been in touch with Irwin Harley of NACO and asked her to give me some similar analysis of counties. I don't know whether or not she'll be able to. There are 3,000 some hundred counties, but she might be able to give us an idea of how common that is. But as I think about it as a former elected official, drawing districts, and I should say, and my conversations with my opponent when I ran for state legislature, Carl Albrecht was very clear that districting is the spoils that go to the victor. Yep, and can be bad consequences. I think we're pretty immune from that because of, first of all, the impossibility of actually gerrymandering Grand County, and secondly, because our decision to have 3 at large and 2 by district further makes that less possible. No matter how you draw district lines, gerrymandering is just not in the cards as a possibility, even if you really wanted to. But again, as I thought about it, I think we would be well advised to stick with what the people have said they want, which is some by district and some at large, and to trust to the elected officials to do a fair job of districting, and even to follow our recommendations, which I believe we should move from the plan into the recommendations section. I just wanted to lay that out because I didn't feel like I could say it as forcefully, even if the phone call is successful. So thank you.
Yep, of course. And I wrote that down, and I'll show you my notes afterwards, so I can reiterate that for Cricket, because she's not here
Well,
now.
Cricket's not going to be convinced. I'm not worried about that.
Well,
She's quite adamant.
sure. I'm
I
just
trust
being,
her to be
being
adamant.
full. I want
Yeah.
everybody the opportunity
Thank
to
you.
be able to speak. So that's really important. Walt.
Bob and I had this conversation before. 4 states do that. I bet no states that I know of have set up something like us, a study committee to change their form of government. So what Utah is an anomaly, and I still think they gave us the authority to do this. But that's a legal question, and I'm not an attorney. But we are an anomaly in the United States, I'll bet you, in that when you think that the county existing elected legislative body here had no say in what we did, that's pretty extreme, pretty radical in and of itself. Thanks.
Okay, any other future consideration, anything else anyone wants to talk about next time we meet? If not, you can email me and we can go through all the rest of the excitement. Marcy Till, any other questions, comments, concerns that you have?
No,
Thank you for attending over the phone. We understand it's very difficult. Do we have a motion to close things out?
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
Okay, we got a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Second by Bob Greenberg. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 I,
Passes unanimously 6-0 because of the absence of Cricket Green. Thank you. And the time closing,
you guys next week.
All right.
Yep,
time
see
that
you,
we
Marcy.
close the meeting is 1:50. Thank you.
Travel safe, babe.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, as well. Sorry I didn't tell you. Thanks for appearing over the phone.
No problem at all.
See you, Gavin.
Out of curiosity, is anybody hearing anything about our letter or outline that we sent to the
You'd be the only one who would.
legislators and other county officials? Any feedback at all?
I've got some feedback from our local elected. They're impressed by it, and they're aware.
No, not meeting. Maybe Mr. Anderson, if you'd want to give Mr. Daniel.
Yeah,